If we could go on and get started, I appreciate everybody showing up at 8:30 in the morning. Seems like we got more members here at a 8:30 meeting after crossover day than we have on a 10 o'clock meeting on a normal day. We got a couple of little things. One of them is a Senate bill we want to take up, and another one is a hearing on a House bill. The author of the House bill had called Pat and said he's running a little late, so we're going to do the Senate bill first. Mr. Chairman, could you indulge me 2 minutes to do something, and then I'll get you out of here. Representative Levitas, would you walk back around this way, please, sir? Ellis, walk over here, please. You know, I can't think of a time since I've been here that we've had somebody on the Ag Committee from dead in the heart of Atlanta. And I'm going to have to tell y'all, I'll be honest with you, we were all a little bit gun shy to get a lawyer from the middle of Atlanta on the Ag Committee.
That makes two of us.
But he has done such a good job and taken such an interest in ag issues. Miss Amanda conjured up a little certificate of appreciation at Ellis's request. And excuse me, let me read it to you. It says certificate of appreciation. This certificate is awarded to Representative Kevin Levitas in appreciation of his valuable contributions to Georgia agriculture and the Metro Atlanta Farmers Association of DeKalb County. And it's got a little piglet on it.
If you don't tell my rabbi, we'll be okay.
Well, the reason the little pig's on it is you were talking the other day about slopping the hogs out the back door.
That was supposed to be our secret.
And we wanted to give you this.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And along with that, an official owner's edition. You got to own one to have a cap like this.
When I'm on my back coat, that's
of a John Deere. And since we know you don't have one, you are now the official owner.
There we go. I don't know if I'll fit on
of
this,
a John Deere tractor.
They look bigger on television.
Trust me, the one on television costs a heap more than that. But
They do.
Kevin, sure enough, we do appreciate you taking interest in the ag community. All right, Senator Bullock. Thank you, sir. Senate Bill 515. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how to run these computers.
Push the red button. Push the button on the bottom. Red light should be on.
There it is.
You got it.
Just wouldn't cut me on, would you, Mr. Chairman?
I had the wrong button, man.
That works. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you for putting this bill on your calendar, and appreciate all the members of the House Ag Committee coming this morning. I know y'all had a long day yesterday. Senate Bill 515 is a bill that changes the buildup of the board of the Georgia Seed Development Commission. A lot of people don't understand what the Georgia Seed Development Commission does, and it's a very important commission, and it was established in 1959, and its charge is to see to it that there are available seed to the agricultural community in the state of Georgia, so that we can, through the University of Georgia and its research scientists, that we can have quality production seed, and it's kind of a three-legged stool. It deals with the seed scientists and turfgrass scientists, to where they are developing new varieties all the time, and once they're approved to be released, then you have to grow those crops to come up with the seed, and that's what this charge is, and it's expanded from just row crop seed into the turf grass industry, and is actually moving into the ornamental green industry also. But in 1979, and all this kind of came to light actually a little bit year before last, when legal counsel was drafting some legislation creating, well, actually it's been 4 years ago, creating the Equine Commodity Commission. And at that time, there was a Georgia Supreme Court case, Rogers versus Medical Association, and in that, the appellates contend that the delegation of the power of appointment to public office to a private organization is unconstitutional. Well, in the original Georgia Seed Development Commission Act, it actually had where there were 3 appointments of farmers to the board made by private organizations, which was in conflict to case law based on that 1979 Georgia Supreme Court case. And so what I have tried to do is to address that part of it, and at the same time put in place to where we included the turf grass industry in it, and still allow for agricultural interest, not only with farmers but ag-related organizations. So on page 2 is where, on line 2 is where we start with the new appointments, and there'd be 2 members appointed by the governor, and it would there would be farmers who or turf grass industry growers, and I don't, if you've got a copy of that version that actually passed out of the Senate that I could have, Mr. Chairman. Don't have it. We amended it on the Senate floor and said 2 members to be appointed by the governor, each of whom shall be a farmer who grows crops or turf grass. Originally, I had tied it down a lot tighter to that and said it was a farmer who grows crops for seed or grows turf, and we took that out because it was just narrowing it down, and we felt like that those farmers that grew the seed, we may have a conflict there because they actually had contracts with the seed commission. So the governor's office has asked, and it's fine with me if this committee wants to do that, they would like to have the language put in the governor's appointment that or a consumer. And I think probably that the 2 members to be appointed by the governor, we'd have to take out the word each, I guess, and in some way put some language in to incorporate that one could be a consumer of these products. So I don't know if legal counsel has an idea on how to do that. That'd be fine with me if that and then we go on, and there would be a member under the same description who shall be a farmer who grows crops or turf, appointed by the lieutenant governor. A member who is a farmer who grows crops or turf that be appointed by the Speaker of the House. The Commissioner of Agriculture, which he's always been on it. 2 representatives of the seed or turf industries or farm-related organizations, one whom would be appointed by the House Ag Committee and one who would be appointed by the Senate Ag Committee. A member who shall be a farmer who grows crops of turf that would be appointed by the Commissioner of Agriculture, the Dean of the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, a seed breeder employed by the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, University of Georgia, to be appointed by the Dean, the Associate Dean of the University of Georgia College of Agriculture, Dean of Research for the College of Agriculture, which is over all the experiment stations where all these seed and turfgrass scientists are employed and work. And in their employment agreement, they also get a royalty, a percentage of the royalty off of the seeds that they develop, and that's what goes through the Seed Development Commission, and they collect that royalty above the cost of the seed and distribute it back to UGARF, this University of Georgia Research Foundation, to be distributed to those. And the law or the agreement defines how all that would be distributed between UGARF and Seed Development Commission. The only other changes is that we put in that on each even-numbered year at the next meeting following July the 1st, which this would take effect on July the 1st, and so they'd have to have an organizational meeting after that. And at that time, the commission shall elect one of its members as a chairperson. We got that gender neutral. And we also put in that if it deems necessary, that it could create its own bylaws. And then if you go on to page if I find the right pages, on page 3 in the original law, it created an advisory board. And Mr. Chairman, I know I never have been invited to a meeting, but it said that the chairman of the House Ag Committee and the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee would both be members of that advisory council, and that's just something that was put in law at that time, and it's never really been a needed body, and so we need to just take that out. But if they need an advisory council, we put in that the commission may appoint an advisory council consisting of such member and qualification of members as the commission may determine, which I think gives them the discretion that they would need if they needed to have an advisory council. And then on the page 4, line 6, we just put clarity in that when these appointments are made, that they're made for 2-year terms, and they would commence on July 1st of each even-numbered year. And this doesn't say that you can't be reappointed, but at least it brings it back to the appointing power, that they are involved in the continued appointment process. There have been some members that have served in the existing capacity for many, many, many years, and even the appointing people didn't realize that they had that appointive power. So I just felt like that we needed to put something in that they'd serve for just a 2-year term, and especially from the standpoint of those 2 members that would be appointed by the General Assembly, because our terms are only for 2 years, and so that would be consistent with us appointing those members. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions of any of the committee members, Mr. Chairman.
Number 26 was first, then number 9, then number 25.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman here, let me clarify something. You were talking about changing and making these appointments be consumers. I'm going to assume you're referring to consumers of seed products, not consumers of agricultural products.
Representative Black, I think the way I've got it already written, it would mean that that's kind of what we would have. It would be a farmer, and farmers are consumers of those seeds. But the way we've actually put it, that consumer could be any individual, I guess, in the state.
That's my concern.
What they consume.
And my preference would be very strongly that it be farmers that were the consumers of the seed, as opposed to seed breeders that were also farmers.
Well, I think the way that we put it a while ago, that it's just a consumer, period. Isn't that right?
I'd prefer it to be left like you got it.
Well, I've tried to appease everybody as I've gone along, and I hadn't been able to appease everybody, but we've tried. And Representative Black, I agree with you.
Kevin?
Senator, I'm honestly more interested in what it is you want. So if that's not something you want, I don't want it in there. But if that's something that you're okay with and you want to include it, my suggestion would be that it, following up on Representative Black, that you add at the end of consumer of seed products, or however you want to put it, who is not a farmer. The intent is to get somebody we certainly ought to not have, with all due respect to North Camp Farming, somebody like me on there. It ought to be somebody, I agree with Representative Black, probably something we want, who has more knowledge in the industry. And so my hopefully friendly suggestion would be, if you're going to include the language in the accommodation, that you include language somewhere along consumer of seed products.
Well, I think the governor's thought process was that he would like to see a consumer of those products, which would be a farmer that grows a crop, that plants a seed, or a installer of turf grass. That they may not be the grower of turf grass, but they buy. I mean, the Georgia Seed Development Commission is not in the business of growing turf grass to sell to a homeowner. We grow turf grass to sell to a turf grass farmer, and we develop turf grass for that purpose. And what I think the governor's idea was that we don't just need to tie it to those people that may grow those products, but those people that consume them, that would be a farmer that just like I buy soybean seed or corn seed or wheat seed or peanut seed, and I'm not growing a registered seed, I'm just growing a certified seed. So I'm a consumer of the products of this organization and those seed scientists. Well, so I think that if we maybe expand that a little bit to where it would say, or a consumer that consumes, or a consumer of these products. And I don't know if that's too...
And as I sit here thinking, ultimately I could be a consumer of the product. So and again, I'm just trying to help here narrow it down to what you're after is the folks who actually use the product and then they sell somewhere else. I see some heads nodding. And y'all got some language you might want to suggest on that?
Well, I think maybe if we put in that one of those would be where we say that shall be a farmer who grows crops or turf. I mean, I think that covers everybody, but some of these people don't grow turf. They are landscapers and they install turf, and they are a consumer. And so I think that is the area that the governor wanted to be sure would be available to be appointed.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question, Senator? It's my understanding that the farmers who purchase seed would be already covered by the language that had been worked out in the original bill. But if the idea now is to cover people who are not farmers, who are growers, then what about the language that one of whom shall be a consumer of seed who is not a farmer?
Well, but that ties it to seed. That doesn't open up for turf grass. I think the area that maybe was more interested in was from a turf grass standpoint.
Yeah, y'all try to get all your language work out. What if we put, instead of using consumer, what if we said one person who uses the products in his or her business?
And that would be a seed agri-supply person that sells seed, or that could be a turf grass company or landscape company.
And is that what you're after?
I think that would cover. What do you think about that, Wayne?
I would like some clarification on what we mean by product.
Right, that's what I would say, the products of the commission.
They don't really belong to the commission, though, do they?
No.
Products grown from seed.
Grown from what?
Products grown from seed.
Well, turf grass is not necessarily grown from seed. A lot of times you have to sprig it.
If I have one more question, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Then what about a purchaser of seed or turf grass?
That would cover it, I think.
Representative Burns, since you went to law school, you want to get in this lawyer argument, or you got a question about some other part of it?
I thought it sounded pretty good the way it originally was.
Go ahead, Kevin.
One more suggestion. I think at some point we have to just respect the Senate language. And my suggestion would be, and one of whom shall be a person who uses the products within the jurisdiction of the commission in his or her business. And that's what that does, or what it's intended to do, is say that this is relating only to the products the commission has oversight over, and that that person uses them in his or her business.
You know, Mr. Chairman.
Like I said, I was gun shy when we got a lawyer from Atlanta on this committee. That's why.
Well, no, I appreciate his indulgence in trying to address a way that we could have, quote, a consumer. But every one of those farmers are going to be consumers.
You're talking about the governor, right?
Well.
Or are you talking about Kevin's language?
I was talking about Kevin's language.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think we've got it covered already, the way the original language is. But trying to always appease everybody, I try to look at every avenue now. Whatever y'all would like to do, you know.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to recommend a motion.
On the bill or on something else?
On a motion, I believe y'all call it move to pass.
Well, let me get.
No, it's all right. Go ahead.
Are you 19?
Yeah, go ahead. No, I'm with him on that one.
All right. Let me see what John wants.
I'm with him on that one.
All right, so what?
We're ready to roll, Mr. Chairman.
My motion
Okay,
would be-
go ahead.
Would be to move to pass without any changes, SB 515 FA2, and that we take up next year this issue and try to accommodate the governor best we can.
Can't make a motion. We're going to make a motion on the bill.
That's my motion.
Second.
All right. We got a motion and a second. 25. Oh, excuse me. Lynn Moore.
Mr. Chairman, I know you were surprised to see me here this morning, but I told you I'd be here, and
I'm
here.
proud of you.
So you cut me off. But, Mr. Chairman, one little quick question here. On page 2, line 18, a seed breeder employed by the College of Agriculture and Environmental Science of the University of Georgia. When you mentioned that, you also said that's getting a royalty from the seeds. Could you explain that?
under the contract agreement with the University of Georgia Research Foundation and the Georgia Seed Development Commission, there is a royalty charged on every bag of seed that's sold, which to you and I as a consumer, it's added into the cost of it. And under that, the royalty distribution, the seed breeder gets 75% of the royalty up to $10,000. Now, after it exceeds $10,000, is 25% goes to the seed breeder, and 10% goes to the Cultivar Development Research Program, and 10% goes to the Breeders Department Cultivar Development Research Program, and 30% goes to the Experiment Station's Cultivar Development Research Program. And so it goes in to help fund the cost of the general development, not just to the soil, to the seed scientists.
That brings me to my real question. And I need an answer to this where I could answer some extension agents who have come to me and some seed growers. A person that's employed with the university as a seed breeder who received a healthy salary, and I'm being asked about the royalty fee there. Is it fair, or would that be double dipping? Now, maybe you can't answer that, but this is what's being asked me, and I haven't been able to find an answer anywhere.
No, sir, I think I can answer that. We have been very successful at the University of Georgia in our research area, and we have had some great scientists. And they don't just up and leave the University of Georgia, because this is an incentive program for them to do research and to try to develop new varieties. And they have a lot of failures. They don't have a lot of successes. They work on a lot of varieties that just don't ever get approved. And there's an improvement process within the contractual agreement there before something is released. And I have had the opportunity to go to the experiment stations and see a lot of the crops research that they're doing. And we would not be able to retain these scientists long term. And most all university research scientists in other colleges, not just our universities in Georgia, they have incentive programs through similar contractual agreements like what we have in Georgia.
Okay, so I think you've given me an answer to give people when they ask me. These people are not paid to their full potential, and the royalty is something to subsidize them where we can keep good research people.
I would say that would be a good synopsis of it, yes, sir.
Thank you.
John, you got something quick?
This is kind of a question, I guess. At one time when we developed seed through the university system and controlled by this commission, some of that seed came into the market as public varieties, and they were able to be produced in a you grow if you were registered, you grow certified seed and registered seed. But it seems as if now everything we produce now goes to a licensure proprietary process. I guess is because of the funding. Is that correct?
No. In the past, when you were doing it, you were paying these royalties.
I know yes, sir. I know we've always paid the royalties.
No, I'm saying that if you grow a registered seed, and you go through the Crop Improvement Association to have it certified so you could sell it as a seed, you have to pay a royalty. That is a part of it. That's the way this money is generated. You never get away from it. If you certify that seed, now if you sell it uncertified, if you plant and don't go through the certification process, then there's no royalty.
My question goes to the point, though, proprietary seed, the licensure has been purchased, and whoever owns that proprietary interest is the only one that can certify that seed. The average grower then can only have select seed.
That's correct.
I think we need to have some sort of look back, I guess I'll say, in that we release some public varieties again, because some public money is going into this process to develop this seed and these different seeds, and there's no avenue now unless you're on in the big part of the business where you grow it, where you're able to gain proprietary interest to produce a registered seed, unless you go through a large company or a seed dealer. The average farmer now cannot grow a registered seed on his own if he buys a public variety. And I hope this commission will look at that issue as we go on, because it seems like we've gone away from that issue over the years.
Representative Burns, I think that falls under the powers of the Seed Development Commission and their contractual agreements, and maybe once we get the new board established, that some of those issues could be brought up and maybe could be looked at.
Thank you.
Ellis?
Mr. Chairman, I just noticed something down here that I wanted to bring to your attention and be sure that you have got this cleared. But down there on line 18, when you talk about the appointment by the Dean of the College of Agriculture, now, is the fact that he's an employee of the state, is that going to get around the constitutional issues that was raised?
Yes, sir. That's not a private organization.
Okay.
All right, we got a motion and a second on the floor. You moving the question?
Yes.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
We got to sign the sheet.
You gonna give me your John Deere tractor?
Did Stan ever? Yeah, okay. All right, House Bill 1060. We're going to have a hearing on it. I promised Stan we would. Or, excuse me, Representative Watson. I apologize. Huh? I think
Motion to table takes precedence.
it does.
Motion to table takes precedence.
Is this the hearing on the DeKalb Reform Act?
Oh my God.
Hey.
Okay.
All right. This is on 1060. It's a substitute that's in your folder. Supposed to be 21-979-5S is what we're working off of. So go ahead, Representative Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being civil this morning. And to those people that I really, really know, thank y'all for being civil as well. Since we're past the bewitching hour of the 30th day, I'm just glad to have a hearing on this bill. As we know, most good legislation are things that make a difference in our society come from people that are not legislators, but from ordinary citizens. I had a constituent from DeKalb County that talked to me a little bit about dogs and cats and animal shelters and euthanization of those animals. For the record, no, I don't own a dog, nor do I own a cat. I got 2 kids and a wife, and they both keep me busy. But I wanted to find out today in this hearing, what was the thought of the committee and also the thoughts of George, and as we go and talk about euthanization. This substitute for House Bill 1060 basically talks about euthanization of animals. It provides for training of certain persons that would be authorized to euthanize animals, and provide for the reporting of certain information to the Department of Agriculture. For the record, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I have attempted to talk a little bit to the Department of Agriculture and the veterinarians, and I also tried to talk to a few of my colleagues that happen to be in the business as well about some of the problems that we might see with the bill, and try to make it as pleasant as possible to see what it does. The bill 1060 basically does 2 things. It just talks about the euthanization of animals. Many of you already know that many states now mandate lethal injection as the only method of euthanization that would be allowed. I think Virginia is probably one of the last states to do it most recently. It is reported less than 1% of shelters in the United States continue to use the gas chamber as lethal injection. We know that some of our counties and cities are under siege right now because they have some lawsuits that are outstanding. And so I'm just trying to encourage the Department of Agriculture to move toward utilizing lethal injection as the method of choice for euthanization of our dogs and cats. The process of lethal injection is simply more humane, in my opinion, for the animal. If administered properly, it usually is no different than having the blood drawn or given a shot by veterinarians. Now, one of the problems that I heard, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, is that it might be costly for the state. I'm not sure what it was cost, but I saw a fiscal note not long ago, but it had not been requested by me, but we'll go through that in just a minute as well. But what we're trying to basically do is to make sure that we have a handle on what we're doing with our dogs and cats, the strays. We're also, in the latter part of the bill, is talking about what can we do to report these incidents to the Department of Agriculture in a way that the data is consumed in one place. And basically it just talks about the number of animals that are adopted by a shelter, the number of animals that are transferred, talks about the number of animals that are impounded. In my county, in DeKalb County, we have a website, our county website, where we show the number of animals that are up for adoption every week. And we take the time to show that every week the number of animals that are adopted, the animals that have been euthanized, and those kind of things. So some counties are already on the cutting edge. But we also know that in the method of reporting, that someone has to keep up with the data. One of the problems that I think the Department of Agriculture had and some of the members of the committee had is that anybody that had to collect this data would have to be paid, and I understand that, and we want to be responsible citizens for the taxpayers' money. But we moved the bill out to allow at least to 2010 to start the process of collecting the data. And so I'm thinking that if we did that, certainly the Department of Agriculture could work with us and find out what things we could do, either quietly or slowly, to make sure that we can have a collection, a database for the strays and the utilization of animals, as well as what we're doing with our adoption. So I tried to work that. Then I moved a little bit further after talking to some of the members over there and made the bill effective on January 1st, 2009. Knowing that we're past the 30th day, knowing that this is a hearing only, I won't take all the time since most of us up until 11 o'clock last night. But basically, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we just wanted to use the euthanization of animals to be lethal injection instead of the gas chamber. If we have to provide training for these people that will be doing the euthanization, that the Department of Agriculture would approve, and not come up with the program themselves, but approve a program where they could have that for the people, and then report certain information to the Department of Agriculture through the counties and cities about the euthanization, the adoption, and those things for our animals. And we know that there are probably about 20 shelters in Georgia now that continue to use the method of the gas chamber for the purpose of euthanization of our animals. And I think that if they have any problems as it relates to leaks or have to repair those gas chambers, they're really outlawed by the Department of Agriculture. So this is just an attempt to encourage the state to actually utilize the gas chamber euthanization of animals for our dogs and cats. That's basically what the bill does, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you, Representative Watson. Anybody have any questions for the future chairman? Doc?
Representative Watson.
Yes, sir.
Have you ever actually watched euthanasia?
No, sir, Dr. Mattis. No, as I told you, I don't even own a dog or a cat.
Okay. Okay. Did you know that AVMA recognizes gas chambers under bottled condition and under closed chambers as a humane method of euthanasia?
No, but I think I talked to you on one occasion in the chamber. I think you made me aware of that.
And the expense, did you know that it's cheaper in the gas than it is an injection?
I think you told me that as well.
And one last thing, these little bitty tiny animals and real sick leukemia cats, their veins are collapsed. You can't get in the veins hardly to give any injections. And so what we're talking about here now is holding them up and sticking them in the abdomen. And did you notice the possibility these leukemia cats' bladder may be filled, and you may hit the bladder instead of hit the abdomen? You may puncture the intestine. To me, that is just as inhumane as putting them in a gas chamber. I personally have witnessed, can I make a statement? I personally have witnessed gas chamber. I don't do it. I supervise, I did supervise, as long as I practiced for 40 years in Cairo, all the Grady County animal control. And so I am well aware of euthanasia, and I can tell you a lot of things that we won't talk about here this morning. But
Okay.
I'm glad you ain't.
And for the record, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I have tried to talk to Dr. Maddox as much as I could about the bill, and that's why we changed some of the things.
And Jay just said, be sure, I graduated from veterinary school in 1959 and practiced veterinary medicine for 44 years, 24/7, before I came up here, and I still go to my hospital and help them on a part-time basis. So what I'm driving at, there's two other parts of the bill that I have a little problem with, and that is over on the page 3, where it says that they will be successfully completed a euthanasia training course. I see our Commissioner Irvin is here in our presence this morning. We don't have such a training course, and the ones who have done it in the past, or the local veterinarians, have helped supervise it. And these guys and ladies who work the animal controls and lay shelters do not go through a training course as such, but they are trained by us and taught how to properly do the IVs. Now, we've never used gas chambers in my area, but I have witnessed a gas chamber, and they simply are put in these gas chambers, they lay down, they go to sleep, and these little bitty tiny puppies and kittens, to me, is more humane than sticking them in the stomach. And the last is, then it says they shall be subject to all record keeping. And my guy, we buy the euthanasia solution and kept it, and he come in and brought me his record, so that's already taken place there.
That's on line 17, I see that.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, as I stated earlier, some of the learned veterinarians for this committee, I was attempting to get with them before I got here. So now that I'm here, I'm hearing the full story. The bill did not just come up yesterday, so I've been trying to figure out what do we need to do to encourage the method of euthanasia. And I respect Dr. Maddox tremendously, and I've been trying to get with him for a number of days.
Let me say one last thing, and I'll be through. Euthanasia is a very, very bad thing. As a veterinarian, the hardest thing I had to do was to have your puppy treated when he was day one on up till he was 15 years old, and then had to sit in there, and we actually have held hands and prayed over a dog before we put him down under anesthesia, a cat. And I love my animals. I know that some of the strays and some of the others have to be put down. I have had to go out on farm calls where horses are broken leg, and they had to be put down. Used to use a IV drip with magnesium sulfate, chloral hydrate. Take 30 minutes to put one down. Him staggered and falling everywhere. Then they finally came along with some of the other medications with xylene. You give them xylene, they let out, and then of course you'd go in the vein with pentobarbital and euthanize them. So euthanasia has advanced a long way, but their medicine's changed a long way. And I feel like right now the majority of the shelters are doing humane injections and humane euthanasia. Enough said, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jock. Representative Watson, this is one reason I want to have us here, and so you get everybody in the same room and all of us hear what
Yes,
both sides of the story. We had put a sign-up sheet out. Mr. Larry Schlesinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Stan, hang on, because there may be some more. I mean, you ain't got to sit right there if you want to sit back out,
I'll sit right there, that's fine.
there may be some more questions come up.
DA staring me in the face, but that's okay. From DeKalb County.
Let's yeah, I want to give everybody a chance to say what they got to say, but we don't want to stay here until dinner time. I think some of us have got a 10 o'clock we got to get to. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Larry Schlesinger. I am the rabbi of Temple Beth Israel in Macon, Georgia. We are going to be celebrating our 150th anniversary in 2009. I was elected to the Post 1 seat in Ward 3 on the Macon City Council last November, and I'm also a chaplain with the Bibb County Sheriff's Office. On January the 22nd, I went down to our animal control office basically to look at the facility. And there wasn't a lot that was very attractive about the facility itself, but that's another issue. It was, unbeknownst to me, the time for the gassing of the animals. And I decided, my gut told me, you don't want to see this. But my head told me that I needed to stay. There were 17 animals that were put into a cage, a steel cage. They were all healthy dogs. They were all just looking for attention and wagging their tails. I had been told that, much to what Dr. Maddox said, that the animals simply, go to sleep. It was like if you take a hose and you put it on your exhaust pipe and run it into the cab of the car, as people do, that you just, go to sleep. It's very simple. It's very painless. Well, the steel cage was lifted up mechanically and moved over and dropped into a cinder block gas chamber. The animal control officer turned on the carbon monoxide from the cylinder for a period of, I guess, about 30 seconds. And then he turned it off. And there was silence. And I said, it's true, they're just going to sleep. And then all of a sudden I heard a squeal. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't associate the word squeal with dogs. But that's the only way I could describe this squeal. And the squeal turned into a chorus of squeals. There were 17 dogs in this chamber. They weren't separated. It was a chorus of squeals that lasted about 30 seconds. And then it got quiet. And then there was this one last squeal. There was a big dog in there that was much bigger than the other dogs. And I'm assuming it was this dog because it was bigger and it took more time for the gas to go through its body. There was this final squeal that lasted again about 30 seconds. And then it was quiet in there. Now, with all due respect to you, Dr. Maddox, these dogs just did not go to sleep. They did not lie down and go to sleep. That squealing told me that these dogs knew that something very out of the ordinary was happening to them. And that their last final moments were really kind of moments of panic. And I was hearing this through cinder block walls of the gas chamber. And that squealing haunts me to this day. I can't get it out of my mind. I think it's time that the great state of Georgia stop the squealing. And you have the power to do that. I came away thinking there was nothing really humane about that practice. I spoke with my personal veterinarian who characterized euthanizing dogs and cats this way by gassing as barbaric. That was his word. I might be a little more charitable and refer to it as regressive. We are not a regressive state. We are a progressive state. Every humane association says that injection is really the most humane way to do this. Gas chambers were basically banned in Georgia in 1990. Oh, sure, gas chambers like ours in Macon were grandfathered in. But it's time that we just ban that practice altogether. So I am asking you as a committee and our legislature as a whole to stop the squealing. And we need to move from cities and counties that are basically disposing of animals to cities and counties that are mainly concerned with the adoption of animals. And I thank you very much for this opportunity to address you.
Thank you, Councilman. Could you want to ask him a question, Doc?
Mm-hmm. Pigs squeal, dogs and cats cry. You didn't hear them squeal. You might have heard them cry.
I heard them squeal.
No, they didn't squeal. Pigs squeal.
It was an otherworldly sound. And with all due respect, these dogs were squealing.
Does anybody else have any questions? Could I ask you one question, sir? And I don't know. Does the city council of Macon have any control over the Macon police, the way they do the animals?
We are in the process of banning the gassing of animals.
Okay. I just see on the list
as a city.
Macon is one that still is grandfathered in.
Right. This will happen very shortly, within the next couple of months.
Okay. All right. Thank you for coming.
But I think we need to do that as a state and make a statement that we are a truly humane state. Thank you.
Appreciate you riding up me and fighting traffic all morning.
Got here at 6:30.
Rebecca Gwynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. My name is Rebecca Gwynn, and I'm an attorney from Atlanta, and I hope you guys won't hold that against me either. I'm also. I beg your pardon? I know. I'm okay with that. I'm also a director of a animal welfare organization in DeKalb County, and we have a small shelter and a high volume, high quality, low cost spay neuter clinic. And I'll put in a push for spay neuter while I'm up here. A while back, Representative Watson contacted me, or we were introduced through a mutual friend, that he wanted to do something for the animals of Georgia, and he held a town meeting in DeKalb County, and people from all over the state attended and talked about some of the different issues that we have in shelters. And from that meeting came this piece of legislation, and I helped him put it together. I wanted to just talk a little bit about it and maybe address some of the questions that I've heard since this legislation's been introduced, some of the concerns, and some of the concerns. I wanted to address some of the things that Dr. Maddox has brought up, and also to thank Rabbi Schlesinger for making the trip here and giving that account. I think his account really illustrates why this law is important. As you mentioned, carbon monoxide or gas chambers are an accepted method from the American Veterinary Medical Association for euthanasia. They're not the preferred method by the AVMA, and they're not the preferred method under the existing law in Georgia. Lethal injection's the preferred method. And the only remaining gas chambers in Georgia were either grandfathered in existence in 1990, which means they're 18 years old now, or they're in counties that are under 26,000 residents. There are about 20 chambers remaining in Georgia right now. The thing about the gas chamber is that while it is an approved method by the AVMA, there are some recommendations as to how that chamber should be used. And one of those recommendations is that the animals should be separated. In other words, they should be individually euthanized, or the chamber should provide some sort of method for the separation of animals. Now, as you just heard, clearly that's not happening in Macon. That's not happening in Macon when they knew there was a witness. So clearly those chambers aren't being operated properly, and the result is devastating for the animals, and that's the description that Rabbi Schlesinger gave you, and it's those kinds of descriptions that we hear all the time in animal welfare that has caused us to want to see the chamber eliminated in Georgia. It has been eliminated in a number of states. According to my veterinarian, there are only 7 states that still allow the chamber. It was most recently a bill passed both the Senate and the House in Virginia. I don't know if that's been signed into law yet or not. The chamber was banned in Tennessee in the year 2000 because a shelter worker actually died operating the chamber. Now, these are steel compartments. In the case of the one in Macon with the cinder blocks, they're filled with carbon monoxide. There is a risk that they leak, and we're talking about in our larger counties that still have chambers that are at least 18 years old if they're legal. They can leak, and they can cause the death of shelter workers, and that indeed happened in Tennessee. The other thing about the gas chamber is that there has to be a 6% concentration of carbon monoxide in order for the chamber to be effective. At 10%, the chamber is combustible. So there's that window of you have to have it right here in order for the animals to be humanely euthanized, and just a little bit above that, any spark in the area, spark in the electrical systems, anything in what we're calling 18-year-old gas chambers will cause those chambers to explode. So there are some real safety concerns for the people that operate the chambers, in addition to how humane is it when those chambers are not operated properly. As far as the overall cost, now clearly if you're taking 17 animals and you shove them into a gas chamber at a time, that may be cheaper than euthanizing them one by one with lethal injection, but that's not the recommended way to do this under the AVMA guidelines. If it's done properly, there's a study that's been done by the Texas A&M University standards that says that the actually lethal injection is a little bit cheaper than the gas chamber. The fluid, and it's comes under a lot of different names. It all has the same active chemical, but there's Euthasol and Fatal Plus and different names like that. It's less than 50 cents a cc. So the actual, and 1 cc does about 10 pounds of animal. So the actual cost of the chemical itself is really not significant in our considerations. I've heard some things about the different methods of euthanasia that are talked about in this bill. Those methods actually come directly from the Department of Agriculture existing regulations on lethal injection. There are 3 ways that these solution can be introduced into the animal. The preferred method is by IV, and Dr. Max kind of explained this to all of you, but the preferred method is IV. When they are not able to locate a vein in an animal, and as he said, in smaller animals, puppies and kittens, then they use IP injection, intraperitoneal, and it is into the abdomen. The reason that the bill asks for 3 times the IV dose is that's what's recommended. It's not, the solution's not being absorbed through the vein and going directly to the heart. It's at that point is being absorbed through the animal's abdomen. Now, I agree with Dr. Maddox. That is can be a painful way to die. The law does permit workers to use sedation before administering IP, and that doesn't have to be administered. The sedation doesn't have to be administered IV either. So there are ways to make it less painless, and that's allowed for, less painful, and that is accounted for in the law. But as far as any increased cost with IP injection, it is only to be used when IV is not possible. That's the current regulation, and that's how it is under the law. So the number of animals that are subject to IP injection is relatively small. The other thing that the AVMA points out is that the gas chamber is not particularly effective for animals that are under 16 weeks of age, animals that are 4 months of age. So, in other words, it takes them longer to die. The gas chamber is essentially those animals inhale carbon monoxide, and smaller animals have smaller lung capacity, and their studies have shown that actually younger animals do stay alive in the chamber longer. Some of them have to be euthanized in the chamber a second time. Some of them actually don't die at all, and then they have to be euthanized by lethal injection. The other side of that is that animals that are very sick or have diminished lung capacity also have difficulty inhaling the gas, and so the process can take longer. And as Rabbi Schlesinger pointed out, as that process takes longer, it is a painful process for the animal. And I don't know exactly how animals experience pain, or what that is for them. I wanted to read you from something from the AVMA, if I can find it here and put on my glasses. Don't seem to have my glasses. I may not be able to read it after all. AVMA describes the stressful reaction of animals in the carbon monoxide chamber. Thank you. Empty. As distress vocalization, struggling, attempts to escape, defensive or redirected aggression, salivation, urination, defecation. I'm going to stop there. It is not, in many cases, a humane way to die. I also wanted to mention, I've heard a couple of things about at one point a shortage of euthanasia solution or sodium pentobarbital in the state. I guess about 8 years ago. I've not heard that. I've not talked to another veterinarian who can confirm that either. But over 6 million animals are euthanized in this country every year. Only 1% of those animals are euthanized in the gas chamber, and so we're. I don't think that the slight chance that there could be some shortage of euthanasia solution is worth the risk, both to the animals that are dying in these chambers, but also to the people who are operating the chambers. I think I've seen the fiscal note, and it talks about how much a certification program would be. Representative Watson has a substitute bill, I believe, that actually removes the certification program and essentially puts the law back in the state that it was in, so that it would be still a training program supervised by an approved program that's supervised by veterinarians. It's essentially what the Department of Agriculture does now. There are some certain requirements for that training, such as humane handling of the animals, stress management for the euthanasia technician, but those are really kind of common sense things and not significantly different from what the Department of Agriculture does now. So that would eliminate a lot of the cost that's associated with the first version of the bill. The other thing that this bill does is it asks for the gathering of animal control statistics. As Representative Watson mentioned, impound, basically how many animals do these shelters take in and how many go out. You may not be aware that at this time, if you were to ask the Department of Agriculture how many government shelters there are in Georgia, and I have asked this question, they're actually not able to say, because we don't at this time keep track of county animal control facilities as such. So that's why there's a definition of what a public shelter is in the bill, and that definition applies to, it essentially comes out of existing law. It's the first part of the existing definition of an animal shelter. So this would define our public shelters, shelters that are using essentially tax dollars, and it would ask those shelters to report their statistics. The Department of Agriculture didn't want to have to collect those statistics monthly. They said that would be an administrative burden, so we changed that requirement so that shelters would still have to report those statistics, identify themselves and report those statistics publicly, but the Department of Agriculture would only have to collect them on an annual basis and on a schedule that they set, so they don't have to collect them all at once. So we think that Representative Watson did that to address any of the actual cost issues in the bill. And I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Thank you, ma'am. We've got one more person that needs to talk. This signed up, Steve Shy. Did I say that right?
You did.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate you taking a few minutes to listen to what I have to say. I previously sent a letter to Dr. Maddox and then copied you on that letter in which I tried to extract some of the provisions of the latest AVMA study of 2007 as to the so-called guidelines for the use of gassing. First, let me say by way of introduction, I'm a retired Marine of 33 years, had combat experience in Vietnam. I'm an adjunct professor of law at UGA, and I'm also the president of our local animal shelter up in Habersham County. I'm also a farmer when I've got time. I speak with some authority, being familiar with the shelter, and I've also gone about the business, as I'm trained to do, of doing research. And I've looked into these issues that have been raised and spent a great number of hours trying to find out what the facts were. Let me first say that I have witnessed gassing in several different places. In none of those places that I witnessed this were any of the guidelines by the AVMA followed, except for the source of the gas, and that was from a tank. In talking to the personnel that administered these, very low level of training. I'm also, on my lawyer side, I'm an OSHA lawyer. And if this practice were done in any industry in this state, there would be blood test requirements, there would be health monitoring requirements for any employee that was this close to this poisonous a gas. But none of that, in my experience, did I see at these local chambers. Also, I think you need to remember to keep your eye on the ball. The House and the Senate already has passed on the humanity of gassing in 1990. That's not the question. It's not a question of whether it's a squeal or a howl or anything else. That issue was already decided by this body. The grandfathering was as an accommodation to local governments to give them time to change their process and not impose on them a sudden capital expense burden to have to change their procedure. I ask you, how many years does it take to change your procedure? And I believe a bill like this is going to be required to encourage those local governments to go ahead and complete the use of their gas chamber and come into the 21st century with the rest of the state. And that's not going to happen. I ask you just to use your own experience and your knowledge of local governments and budgeting, as I have to see it on a daily basis in trying to administer the animal shelter in Habersham County. And I'm a volunteer doing that, by the way. Money is hard to come by, and the animal shelter is usually the last thing on the list when the money's doled out. These local governments are not going to change their practice until they have to. Also, as the recent litigation in Cobb County demonstrates, many of these shelters are fudging, to use a polite term. They are not really repairing those chambers. They are replacing them, in effect. And the Department of Agriculture has conceded that it does not have the resources to adequately monitor this program, to actually go out and watch these chambers and see what actually is being done and see what kind of repairs or capital improvements are actually being done on these chambers. And I use the word chamber loosely. Until December of last year, one of the counties using a so-called chamber was using a Dempsey dumpster with a loose lid. Sadly, the way we treat the least fortunate in this state reflects on this state, and that includes poor children as well as poor animals that we kick out of our homes. And I think we have an obligation to do better. Again, I would commend to you a little study of the other states that have already dealt with this problem. Not to say that we ought to follow the lead of any other state necessarily, but all of the arguments that have been suggested already this morning have been made to a great extent in these other states. And yet, as you heard, how many states still allow gassing at all? And I would urge the state of Georgia to step forward and do better. Now, as far as the record collection, again, if I were to ask you, members of this committee, leaders of our government, today, how many gas chambers are there in this state that are still operating? The closest I've heard is about 20. So do any of us know exactly how many gas chambers there are in this state? Furthermore, do we have any idea about how many animals are going through the shelters in Georgia? I just ask you, do you know? Do you have any idea? Is it 10,000 or 10 million? And how in the world can we run this government and try to do better in this area if we don't even know how many we've got going through the system? Being an old Marine and being kind of mission-oriented, I think that way. I think in linear terms. And the first thing you do if you've got a mission is find out what's out there. And I would urge you to keep these record-keeping provisions in this bill. We've got to know what's going on. And it's a little bit artful, some of the comments I've seen from some people who object to these record-keeping requirements. If you read between the lines, they're clearly saying they do not want the public to know what the statistics are. And indeed, I can say that's the case up where I live. If the people knew the horror that goes on at these places on a daily basis, they would be demanding more be done. And I can assure you from what I've seen in my research over the last couple of months and communications with other people in this state, this is not going to go away. This is not going to go away. You've got a growing constituency in the state and in each of your districts of people who are concerned about this to the point that we are going to speak out. And I would ask you to be ahead of that instead of behind it. I'll be glad to answer any questions if you've got any.
Thank you, sir. And all right, Doc.
I appreciate your comments, and I want you to know I am not condoning gas chambers. I'm just saying they have been approved methods. I want you to know the worst type of euthanasia that I have to do is a feral tomcat that's screaming and hollering. You can't get an abdomen. You can't get him anywhere except just try to get him down. And we use a drug called Telazol, get him down on anesthesia, and then intracardial euthanize him. But there's a lot of things that we call unhumane that are humane, and there's a lot of things we call unhumane that's vice versa. So what I'm saying to you is that down in Grady County, and I guess I'm patting myself on the back, I've been doing this for over 40 years now. We keep all of the anesthesia in our hospital locked under 3 locks. The animal control officers were trained by me and my partner. They come in on Friday morning. They bring me a list of how many cc's and what animals they put to sleep. They bring me an empty bottle, and I take this empty bottle and give them back an only bottle, and I only let them have enough pentobarbital, which is we call euthanasia, bought from Sharon. and we buy it and let them have about 100 cc's, if that's how many they got this morning in the shelter, and then they bring it back to me and pick it back up. We keep the records. I can tell you how many is picked up, how many were adopted, how many were euthanized, and how many cc's it was taken. So the records are kept in Grady County. And we've got, and I said one other thing, we have got one of the finest shelters that you'll find. Our county commissioners built us a new building because it was out of the weather, the other one, and I defy anybody to say that Grady County is not humane. I would love to welcome any of you to come down and watch.
Well, we'd love to send some animals your way. I take your points, and I'm not saying that in individual counties and individual cases there may not be records kept. But again, if you took it upon yourself as a member of the state government, an elected representative, to ask the state government to provide to you the numbers of animals that are put through the shelters in Georgia, public shelters, you would not get that number. That's what I'm saying. I mean, you could go to each county and then try to get those numbers. But again, I think that's hiding the ball. If you read the Open Records Act in Georgia, the clear intent of the legislature, and clearly from the case law, is that the records are the public's. Those are our records, not the government's. And we have a right to those, and the government should not be putting roadblocks up in our way to acquire those records. And that's what you're doing, in effect, if you say that a citizen has to go to 159 counties to get these data. It's simple enough in this computer age for the state to require these data to be put through to a central location where they could be obtained by the public, because they're our records, and we have a right to them. But again, I take the doctor's point. We've got the same situation up in my county. We've got a great vet who trains our personnel, and we do drug-administered euthanasias, and that's unfortunate, but that's the way it happens. But the problem is we can't say what other counties are doing, and that's the problem. That's the problem.
Let me make one last statement, Tom. What we need to do statewide. In my freshman year in 2005, I was fortunate to pass House Bill 452, which was a spay and neuter bill. It gives you a right as a Georgia citizen to take your Georgia income tax and return back $1, $10, $100, $1 million. What do you want? Goes to Commissioner of Agriculture after $50,000 maximum taken out of the Department of Revenue. That was to cut down on the amount of euthanasia, but they still not utilizing it. Then we have the buy me tags. So what we need to do, instead of get out here and really start fussing about the unhumane euthanasia, is push for spay and neuter.
I agree completely with you. I agree completely. That was going to be my next point, but I didn't want to stray off the point that we were talking about euthanasias. But you can't, as I see in the shelter in Habersham County, the problem is that is the low-hanging fruit, as I would call it. That's the easy thing for local governments to deal with, is a shelter. It's much harder for them to have to push back on the public and require them to get their animals spayed and neutered, to require them to keep them on a leash, to keep them in their yards, and that kind of thing. The problem is rampant reproduction. And until the state and local governments do something about it, we're going to keep having this problem of the numbers.
Tim? I have not seen the physical note yet, but in terms of, and I know you're talking about it being easy to get all those records together. Do you know, Andy, how much that would cost to have the reporting at the level of detail y'all want for 159 counties? And I'm assuming that you would have the Department of Agriculture maintain it.
I don't, but I know that at least in my county and then the survey that I've done of the counties around me, those data are kept locally. I mean, the commissioners, county commissioners and the city councilmen want to know what those data are, and as was already explained, at least in some counties, that's on the website. It's on our website. So those data are there. My point is, though, they ought to be pushed to Atlanta so that there's a central repository of these data online so that you can access them to make better judgments about what to do at the state level, and that the people have a right to see them, too. So, but in terms of the cost, I think it would be marginal myself, because those data are already being kept, and it's just a matter of sending them through the internet to somewhere at state government here in Atlanta.
One of my pet peeves around here is unfunded mandates, which we're great at doing. And I guess my question is that, do you think that's an appropriate burden for the counties to take up? Do you think that ought to be a state expense? We've just gotten some revised revenue estimates that are going to affect our budgets
Right.
Humane treatment for these animals in euthanasia. So my question goes to, who's going to bear the cost and how are we going to do it? Now, of course, we got to know how much it costs if we're going to be.
Well, I mean, from my own standpoint of running a shelter on a shoestring, and going out and begging for every cent we get, I would still say that would be an expense we could absorb in terms of just requiring the shelter manager to push those data in on a monthly basis. There could be a electronic report form. As I say, the data are probably being kept, even though it might be in a handwritten notebook. And as the doctor said, where they're using drug euthanasia, they got to keep records to account for the medicine. So I think that part would be a legitimate push down to the local governments. And then again, if you, and I'm no government budget expert, but it would again seem to me to be at the margins of the DOA budget to have at least some repository, electronic repository for these data to come in.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I can answer the representative's question if you like about the cost of the statistics.
Okay. Quickly.
The fiscal note says that the cost would be $118,000, $75,000 to develop the statistical database, and $43,000 for an ongoing cost of one person to manage the database. Now, that's if the department collects the statistics monthly. We've changed that to just a yearly collection. I also want to point out it's not all counties in Georgia have animal control. We actually don't know, without this law, how many counties actually have animal control shelters.
Commissioner, do you have an answer to Kevin's question, or are you wanting to talk?
I'd like to respond to this citizen from my home county. It's no easy way to take life of an animal, and I didn't understand you come to take a position on that particular part. So for him to criticize my department, to give information that we do not have the technology today to give, I think is unfounded. He's in the news every week. I live less than 3.5 miles from his facility. He needs to go back home and get his business in Hampshire County and leave you folks up to decide where you fund our need for technology. Give numbers of animals that have to be put down. We know it's too many. If you give us that money, you'll provide the information.
All right, thanks, sir. We got a couple more. Davis Cozy and Carolyn Denise, we got to go in just a little bit. I didn't know this thing was going to run this long. I didn't know the Seed Commission bill was going to run that long either.
I appreciate
Go ahead,
it,
sir.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. And I'll be brief. I'm in the gasoline business. I'm a petroleum distributor. I don't know if that's worse than an attorney right now or not, but if you'll indulge me just for a minute. I got involved with the animal advocacy by simply flagging down the animal control officer and asking her if I could do something to help after reading an article in the paper, and found out that the shelter was right down the road that our 65-year-old office is on. I'd never even been there. Out of sight, out of mind, and I think that's probably a lot of problems in a lot of our counties and cities about animal control and what's going on down there. I did have the opportunity to visit. We've formed a 501c3 and have done a lot of fundraising over the last 4 years. And I visited some shelters that I'm envious of. One in Valdosta, and they euthanize every day, but they do it by lethal injection. Our shelter is way undersized, and we're trying to build a new one. We only got 10 runs in the Perry shelter, but a lot of times the other day we had 57 dogs on the books. We do this through fostering and outreach. It's unbelievable what people will do out there if given the chance with the right kind of attitude and leadership. We have not had to euthanize an animal for space in several years. In fact, our placement rate's over 90%. Right to the north of us is a whole different story. Warner Robins runs an animal shelter, and Robins Air Force Base, City of Centerville, as well as the greater Houston County, unincorporated Houston County, all have their animals going in that one place. 4-day wait, and then they put them in that box that I passed around, that old cinder box with the old metal rusted door on the front. Dr. Maddox, I did some research as well, and I'm not near as eloquent as our other speakers are, but I did some research too on the AVMA guidelines. And one of them, one of the most important issues that I think speaks to this shelter and the operation going there is that the CO2 chamber must be of highest quality construction and should allow for separation of individual animals. That's a key recommendation of the AVMA, and certainly that's not being done in that little box there, as you can see. There's no way, and I really would doubt whether it's even legal. You look at the caulking around the door and everything. The collateral effect of them continuing to use that method in Warner Robins is that they have totally ostracized all of the support groups, anybody with any group. They've all disbanded basically in a county that calls itself progressive, and is progressive if building roads and housetops is progression. But they've completely run off. In fact, owner surrender is a very high rate of owner surrender. It's a very transient county. There's deployment going on with Robins Air Force Base. People don't want to give up their animals to that shelter because it's just a death penalty. There's nobody pulling animals, very little pulling animals for adoption. We, in fact, use the PetSmart in Warner Robins in Perry because my 501c3 goes up there every other weekend, and we do a lot of adoptions up there. They have nobody doing anything. So it's basically a kill shelter. And I just think that I'm appealing, unfortunately, my representative, Representative Sellier, is still, I assume, still not back to work, and hopefully he will be soon. And
he is getting better.
He is, and I sure.
They say he's 50%. I meant to say that before the meeting, but go ahead.
At any rate, I just appeal to you. I wish that the bill was simple, with all due respect to Ms. Gwynn and Representative Watson, who I think is good intentioned. I wish the bill simply says, let's not gas our animals. The Virginia bill that just passed that you mentioned is 2 lines. 2 lines. It says no more lethal injection. Everything has to be done with lethal injection. Here's the effective date. The difference in the House and the Senate bill was one of them, it went into effect when the law was passed, and the other one, it was in October of this year. So I don't know which one it ended up, but either way would be good, October. So it gave them some time. Fiscally, just briefly, I've tried to do everything under the radar. I'm not one of these groups that's going to have a demonstration or anything. I've done things in pre-council. I've done things at SPLOST meetings trying to get the county to come around. We don't need a T-SPLOST because 85% of the money went to roads anyway on our last one. But we try to do things out of the limelight in a business way. I even in November, I counted up the days left in the year. I used a $10 per animal euthanasia charge and offered to write them a check to turn off the gas chamber at least through the holidays, and let's talk about what to do after January, and they refused. And Perry, our cost is $8 for a big dog. And the chief of police actually said that the difference in the cost of running that chamber and doing it, of course, they're not running it like it should be, or it'd be more expensive, but it's $17,000 a year in the county of Houston County to euthanize properly or to put them in that box. And so I don't know how that, I don't know how you prorate that out as far as the bigger picture and statewide, but I think that it's certainly with any of the 22 entities or however many it is can absorb that cost. They admitted it wasn't a fiscal thing. It's just they can't get the inertia to turn it off. And I'm just appealing to the state to do that. And I appreciate your time and take any questions.
Thank you, sir. Anybody got any questions? All right. Appreciate you fighting traffic this morning to get here at 8:30. Carolyn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee, and thank you, Representative Watson, for any reason to bring up animal overpopulation in Georgia. Our board has long had the same stand. We don't really want to talk about euthanasia that much. We want to talk about decreasing the numbers that we have to kill. We are concerned about the unfunded mandates. We do know, I work a lot with feral cats. We know about the situations where lethal injection is really not appropriate. There's the 100 rabid rats or, the leukemia-positive cat that has a collapsed vein. Most of the time, we really do want a lethal injection. We'd love to see a bill that urged that give them opportunity, the assets, the training. We have a lot of activists that we could probably train and get them to get in there and kill these animals for us. But this is an unfunded mandate. You need to realize that companion animals are the second largest industry in Georgia, according to the pet industry statistics. Also, that $1 now spent in spay-neuter or stopping the breeding will save up to $20 in animal control costs in less than 5 years. We have animal control people that truly should be the highest paid citizens that live in our counties, and animal protection also. We have people here that are going to be expected to do. I'm a statistician. I know a lot of the animal control and animal protection people. They're not. It's going to take some special training. It's information they want. It's said that in Atlanta, Georgia, we're still killing 80,000 animals per year. Well, that's one person's set of statistics. Mine says it's still around 100,000. So how do we want to spend our money? How do we want to train our people? Certainly, in animal protection right now, we've got some really wonderful people. We're losing them every day. They're so underpaid. Here we are. We want them to have another skill set. They're so completely underpaid. As soon as we get them up to speed, they're out there trying to counsel these people. They see how much money they make, and they're gone. So all we really are is a training facility across the street. So if there's anything that we can do to, we all like these statistics. I urge humane societies every day, don't accept an animal. To me, there's no such thing to our organization. There's really no such thing as a no-kill shelter. As long as they can say with a heavy heart, we can't take your dog, take it down the street, they'll kill it for you. There is really no such thing as a no-kill shelter. We have to all be no-kill or we are all kills. We certainly do want to see the injections. We'd love to see some assets put that way, and I'll take any questions because I am cognizant of the time.
Thank you, ma'am. 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one little quick question. About 8 years ago, I think, we passed the spay and neuter bill. Could you tell us what kind of collections we're having now, or what kind of success it is?
Yes, sir. In fact, thank you for that little extra time because Representative James was our sponsor on the dog and cat sterilization program. We've done approximately 30,000 spays right now, and that's with literally no marketing. So if you know anybody that wants to volunteer, if you'd like to throw some money into that, especially when you know that $1 now saves up to $20 in less than 5 years, we'd love I'd say about $20 million to get that marketing and up to speed. And then also to the good Representative Maddox for sponsoring the tax checkoff. Anything that you do to make an animal more valuable, whether you put an ID on a dog or whether you put a tag on your plate, as long as we can bring this problem mainstream. I mean, this is a people problem, just not an animal problem. Statistically, right now, we're having an issue with mortgages. I called several of our animal protection and humane societies around the county, and yes, there is definitely a spike. First thing out the door is always a dog or cat. In fact, as I spoke with former Representative Rice this morning before this meeting, and remember the Hall County crematorium, the first thing out the door was a dog. The second thing out the door was a cat. So, it's going to be a human problem always. And we do want the training, and let's get some of those activists and volunteers out there, teach them how to do this.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Watson, you want to circle up?
Yes, sir. I just want to thank the committee for taking this time. I didn't know it would take this much time as well, and thank Dr. Maddox for his knowledge. But I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for getting us all in one room, and that's what I've been trying to do the last 30 days to talk about it. I think for the testimony you heard today that there is some awareness of what we're trying to do with euthanization in Georgia. I think we do need to be on the cutting edge as progressive as we can. And I commend to you the substitute for 1060. You may have to go into study, I'm not sure. But I think that what we do need to do is look at what we're doing in the state of Georgia with our dogs and cats. So thank you so much again, Dr. Maddox, and members of the committee for being here today.
Thank you, Representative Watson. And yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I forgot to mention one thing. In 2000, we did run out of sodium pentobarbital, and if it wasn't for the Atlanta Humane Society sharing that, there would have been some shotguns, used around the state. So as long as we have an alternative at some point, and like some of these counties, we're just afraid some of these small counties with this unfunded mandate, instead of doing as they should and having these assets go to them, they're just going to close their doors.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. And I appreciate all y'all getting here at 8:30 and sitting for a while, and thank you for your input. And we'll tinker with this thing some more.